This next clip I'm about to show you, on the surface, looks like East Africa operating at the absolute peak of its confidence. And I want you to watch it very, very closely, not just what is being said, but I want you to see the energy on that stage. I want you to see the scale of the commitment being made and the certainty in that room, okay? But I also want you to pay careful attention to who is not there in this particular clip I'm about to show you. You watch this.
And by the way, we are discussing a refinery in Tanzania.
The two of you?
Yes, we are not discussing a refinery in Kenya or Uganda. We are discussing that we're going to have a joint refinery in Tanga.
Is that if we agree with the 3-4 governments here about the refinery, we will lead and we'll make sure that that refinery is built within the next 4 or 5 years.
Now, tell me what you noticed on that clip. Did you notice it? So we had Aliko Dangote, the wealthiest man on this continent, on the African continent. We have President William Ruto, the president of Kenya, who was the host, the endorser, and the man whose name is on the stage, okay? We also had the president of Uganda that you probably didn't see in the clip. The clip was just clipped, but the man was there again. So we saw at that stage that billions were committed, you know, those presidential energy, and the entire Africa was watching, the international community was watching as well, because it's always nice to see African leaders talking about African matters on African soil. You know, there's nothing to do with the West coming in to pledge billions of dollars. This is what we're going to do, and so on and so forth. So that was very nice to see. It was something that Africans, you know, have always wanted to see, you know, a big shot coming, discussing with governments and doing all these things. But the one person whose country this announcement was about, President Samia Suluhu Hassan of Tanzania, was nowhere on that stage. Mama Samia herself was missing. She wasn't beside them. She wasn't in the room. None of her representatives was there. You'd have thought at least maybe, just maybe the business community of Tanzania would have been there to represent the government, you know, with the high-level officials over this particular important announcement. There was nothing and nothing at all. And yet this is an issue that affects Tanzanian communities, Tanzanian resources, Tanzania's economic future. And yet the leader of Tanzania was not consulted at all. She was not present. And as we will see, not even informed before that announcement was made public. You know, so how bad is that? Now, within weeks of that summit, the deal effectively flipped. Everything just went from 100 miles an hour to zero. Tanga project quietly became a Mombasa conversation. And when you understand that Mama Samia was never in the room to begin with, the turnaround stops looking like a business decision. It starts looking like a child's play at billionaire tables. And this led to one of the most publicly uncomfortable moments between East African heads of state in recent memory. And now let me give you some context, because this is where the child's play theme becomes impossible to ignore. See, when you see these motorcades, the presidential motorcades, the private jets, presidential jets, the summit stages with the flags perfectly arranged, you naturally assume that somewhere behind all of that, they are professionals at work. You've got feasibility teams doing all the work and so on. I mean, looking at that, I would have thought perhaps, you know, on the part of the Kenyan government, you would have had probably different ministries working along this issue. The Ministry of Energy, or probably the Ministry of Works and Supply, whatever ministries it is, merging, working together with the ministries of Tanzania on the other side as well. Ministerial drafts, papers coming in, you know, different meetings at different levels, months before this announcement was made. That by the time the president, such as Mama Samia, gets that report on her table with the dead stamp on, boom, this is what it is. She should be able to ask and say something like, well, who came up with this idea? That's a very good report. Can we see, how can we move forward with this? This was very good. I'm really excited about this. Can we actually perhaps try and engage the Kenyan counterparts, probably even the president himself, and start this ball rolling? This is what you'd expect. Now, given all these confusions on both camps and things flying all over the place, not being certain, what we saw next tells a completely different story. Now, I want you to watch how Mama Samia responds to being completely blindsided by Ruto. Okay, this announcement that was made about her own country on someone else's stage. I want you to watch this clip and we'll have a little discussion after.
Tulipokuwa tunaongea ndani kule, nilimbana Ruto, kaambia umekwenda kutangaza refinery Tanga, mbona mimi sijui? Hasa atasema mwenyewe pale kwa nini katangaza.
So we can see that Mama Samia wasn't messing there. She was not playing at all, because that was not a polite correction. Just in case you thought it was not a polite correction at all. That was a head of state demanding accountability in public, and it was entirely justified. I mean, personally, I feel as though, yes, it was public humiliation, but the president of Kenya, Mr. Ruto, deserved that sort of treatment by Mama Samia. And if you look at Ruto's response, he said, and think carefully about what this really means. He said that if he had known it would have caused such annoyance, he would have concentrated the deal around Mombasa. Now, this is not what many people expected, okay? Because first of all, this is not an apology, okay? This is a man that was caught between what was promised on a stage in his own country with Aliko Dangote and other heads of state, and what the political reality of this region actually demands of him. So instead of just apologizing and say, well, we are sorry, let's start on a new page, hands up, I should have done this a better way, let's now follow the right procedures, please do not get put off right in front of the public. People were going to understand and say, well, mistakes do happen, and perhaps let's start on a fresh page. But the lack of prudence didn't even stop there, because the man, President Ruto and his team, went further. They walked into the Tanzanian parliament and essentially told Tanzanian lawmakers that their country should consider itself lucky to have been chosen. It was very clear that that is a language of hierarchy. In other words, President Ruto, to me, by how it comes out, it was as if he's trying to say that we are here and you are there, and so you're lucky. You are very lucky to have been chosen to be part of this particular project. Now, this is where I want to bring our last conversation back into the room, because here is the connection, and I want you to follow me very closely on this one. Now, given all these things that have happened, you can see there's confusion on one camp, there's another camp is saying one thing, the other camp is saying another thing, the optics of engagement are not adding up. All of these things, these are things when people from the outside, the business world sees these things and they see this pattern, they don't just raise an eyebrow. They don't just say, well, these things happen. They recalculate their risk, okay? And this is exactly why Moody's credit ratings for most African countries are deemed as risky. And this is where a lot of people complain, why do they always continuously rate the African business climate as risky? Because you can imagine if somebody today watching from Bulgaria, we've got a big shot from Bulgaria or a big shot from the Philippines, he's planning to invest in a cocoa production plant in, say, Tanzania, okay, or even in Kenya. And he's thinking, what can stop my project or my big plans being announced at such high level stakes at the billionaire's table, whatever it is, and then just collapse the next day? You see, this kind of public misunderstandings and political mixed signals, as we've seen involving the President Ruto, we've got Dangote and Mama Samia, these are things that may not explode into major international legal battles, partly because at the end of the day, we are Africans dealing with fellow Africans, you see. So there's still some level of cultural understanding there. But imagine if Dangote was a major Western investor, okay? Let me just put it blunt. If the billionaire Dangote was white, he was coming from the West, you can imagine how that was going to be taken, okay? You would have probably started hearing phrases like, this is damage to investor confidence, this is public humiliation, this is reputational harm, breach of agreement. There would have been all sorts of names being thrown out in the public, in the media, with the lawyers flying. And before you know it, lawyers were going to start getting involved, arbitration panels activated, governments are potentially paying out millions in compensation. And I'm not even joking. This is something that potentially happens. Look at what recently happened in Zambia, okay? With the Chinese-owned Sino Metals leach company in Zambia after that toxic spill into the Kafue River. They polluted the Kafue River, and authorities, the Zambian authorities, ordered them to clean up, to have a immediate cleanup operations. And what happens? There were lawsuits. There were lawsuits flying. They started arguing about it, and conversations flying around. Discussions immediately entered the conversation. And you think this is something that would have been just straightforward. You've polluted the river, you have to clean it, you know. But somehow there's that expectation that because it's partly the government is involved, it's also their responsibility to clean up that mess. And that is why African countries need to be extra careful and pay attention, because there's a very small department within the World Bank called the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, also called in short as the ICSID. Now, this is where governments around the world have faced massive claims, massive litigations, massive lawsuits from investors that dispute things like contracts, investors, or whatever it is. And sometimes over things that do not even seem significant at all. Things like what has happened to Dangote currently, this could have been such a big deal if that was a Western investor. And this is why in geopolitics, words matter. You know, public conduct matters, stability matters, because one diplomatic fallout, one public embarrassment, or one badly handled dispute can suddenly become $1 billion problem. Now, if $1 billion deal investment between African nations, between neighbors, as we've seen, not far, we're talking of Tanzania and Kenya, if that sort of a deal could fail, not because of sanctions, not because of geopolitics, not because of anything else, but simply because one leader was not in the room, because a phone call was not made, there was no handshake, there was no optics of engagement, because of those reasons, $1 billion deal has failed. And you wonder how this sovereign pragmatism is going to work. You know, honestly, because basically what it is there was pride basically on Mama Samia's part to say, well, because I was not consulted, nobody told me about this, my people didn't know about this, and because of all of these things, for that reason, we would just throw away the $1 billion deals. And here we are, we've got Ruto as well coming with his fully blown ego. Instead of apologizing on that stage and say, well, this is a mistake we did, we should have handled this issue much better than we did. Instead of apologizing, instead of saying, well, is there any way we can start from scratch? He went on, no apologies, no nothing, went to the TZ parliament, doubled down and rightly started saying, well, you are lucky as Tanzanians that you were chosen to do these kind of things. And you wonder what this sovereign pragmatism will achieve. I think it's because African countries, we've relied so much on this donor aid, and so when it comes to doing business with each other, we simply can't. So this is the kind of conversation I want to hear in the comments. You know, did Mama Samia overreact? Did President Ruto have this ego, you know, that he just wanted to bulldoze this deal and make sure that it works? You know, was Dangote impatient now that he's now moved his money? He's not even talking about Tanga anymore. When 2 weeks ago at the Africa We Built Summit 2026, he was very sure and was even saying, I'm committing my billions to Tanga in Tanzania. And suddenly, all those billions are now moved. They are now pointing towards Mombasa. So, you know, it's very confusing. It's very, very confusing. But one thing I know is that this pragmatism is a good thing, and this is what most African nations need. We need to start moving from the aid model to the trade model. But again, we need to improve the optics engagement of the trade and use those feasibility studies amongst ourselves, because this is what the West demands on. You know, they will demand the feasibility studies, reports, and reports. It doesn't mean that we have to just do the reports when we're dealing with the West, okay? Even amongst ourselves as African nations, these are things we need to do. So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is NB, and this is War We Are Reclaiming. I'll see you in the next one.